In Seattle this morning, police are hunting a mass murderer believed to have killed as many as 21 prostitutes in the last 22 months. David Burrington reports.
Been called the Green River Killer ever since the first bodies, 5 of them, were pulled from this river. Since then, 7 more bodies have been discovered nearby, all those of young prostitutes, according to police. And the number of missing increases steadily. 2 were added to the list this week. All the victims worked this strip near the Seattle airport, crammed with hotels, motels, and strip joints. Angry residents are demanding police do more to stop the killings. One young prostitute who operates along the strip said she's terrified every time she's picked up.
I don't know, I guess I'm just lucky that I never came across that certain freak.
Police say the victims are similar, runaways, very young, disturbed. Most were strangled, their bodies left nude. A police task force has little hard evidence, but it thinks a single psychopathic killer is responsible.
However, it would be illogical and improper from an investigative perspective to become that tunnel vision and exclude the possibility of any copycat crimes or the possibility of a multiple suspect.
Police suspect other prostitutes might be able to provide leads, but because of their profession, they've been uncooperative. David Burrington, NBC News, Seattle.
The American Automobile Association reports that plenty of gasoline is
Recalls this afternoon. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
Police in Virginia are investigating the execution-style murder of 5 women in the past 11 days. They don't know yet whether there is a pattern to these crimes, but the murder of people in series or serial murders has police departments across this country worried. As Dennis Murphy reports tonight, they're now working together to develop new leads.
They call it the work of the Green River Killer, probably one man who has murdered 13 young women near Seattle. Case unsolved. On the Gulf Coast, 2 drifters, Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas, have confessed to the killings of more than 200 women and children. Gerald Stano says he murdered 31 women in Florida.
Motiveless, random killings, sometimes thousands of miles apart. A Justice Department investigator calls it terrifying, an epidemic. They're known as serial killers, and according to law enforcement officials, there are at least 35 of them roaming the country now, stalking victims.
There might be anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 people killed by serial-type murderers in the country today.
There have been notorious serial killers throughout the country. In Florida, Ted Bundy suspected of murdering more than 30 women. In Chicago, John Wayne Gacy convicted of killing 33 young boys. And in California, Angelo Buono Jr. and Ken Bianchi convicted of 9 hillside strangler slayings, all deeply troubled sexually. Since 1978, 17 men have been convicted of killing 10 or more people.
Historically, they kill certain types of victims: women, homosexuals, and children.
There is almost always a pattern to the killings, a pattern not obvious to the local investigators left with a body and few clues. But the Jacksonville, Florida police hope to change that. As a model for tracking future serial killers, crime analysts there have painstakingly recorded hundreds of details of dress, mode of travel, and method of killing in the Lucas Toole murder cases. The information has been categorized and stored on computer. A summary of the study is on its way to every major police department in the country.
When we start tracking someone like Bundy, who had a particular way of killing, had a particular victim that he liked to attack, analysis can be successful in cases like that.
2 weeks ago, homicide investigators from 20 states met in Louisiana to compare notes on apparent serial killings. By the end of the year, federal budget permitting, there may be a computerized crime center in Washington that will allow them to share information in the same way. The computer may reveal the killer's pattern, but not his identity. Arresting and convicting serial killers is still, for the most part, a matter of luck. Dennis Murphy, NBC News, Miami.
Next, Kenley Jones.
Frank Burkholzer, NBC News, Las Vegas.
In Seattle, another grim discovery today that could be connected to the string of Green River murders which have shaken that West Coast city. Explorer scouts today found a 4th skeleton in a wooded area outside of town where 3 other skeletons were discovered this weekend. So far, 16 murders have been blamed on the Green River Killer. Most of the victims have been young prostitutes. This latest find would bring that gruesome total to 20, putting it among the largest mass murders in American history. Singer Marvin Gaye's soulful music filled the Los Angeles.
Defeated by 174 votes. Explorer scouts have found the remains of another human body buried on a wooded hillside near Seattle. The skeleton is the fourth to be uncovered in the Green River Valley in 3 days. Authorities fear it could be the remains of the 20th victim of a sexual psychopath who preys on young prostitutes. A federal judge has approved the largest...
Gilmore, NBC News, Moscow.
Police in Washington state believe they've found the remains of another victim of the so-called Green River Killer. The victim, identified Monday as 17-year-old Cindy Ann Smith, was last seen in March of 1984. Police believe that Smith is the killer's 37th known victim, all of them women ranging from 16 to 36 years of age. The murders began in summer of 1982, and since then an army of detectives and a multi-million-dollar computer system have been unable to crack the case. The White House is wasting no time looking for a candidate to succeed Supreme Court Judge.
Sandy Gilmore, NBC News, Moscow.
In this country, in Washington state, still another victim has been identified in the nation's longest list of unsolved murders, the Green River killings. 37 women have died, 9 missing, all thought to be victims of the same killer. John Sandifer of KING-TV in Seattle has the latest.
It was a familiar routine for the Green River Task Force, sifting through any remaining evidence at a site where someone, in this case 3 young boys, had stumbled across human remains. After the passage of 3 years, they would not find much more than a skeleton. Late Monday, the remains would be identified as those of 17-year-old Cindy Ann Smith, last seen in March 1984 hitchhiking from her mother's home to that of her sister in Seattle. She is victim number 37. Cindy disappeared from a strip of highway south of Seattle, where no fewer than 18 other young women, mostly prostitutes, dropped out of sight beginning in the summer of 1982. The first grisly discoveries of their bodies was along the picturesque Green River, hence the name that has come to represent untold horror to many in the Northwest. The Green River murders have included victims ranging in age from 16 through 36. Most of their bodies have been recovered in wilderness dumping grounds in groups of 2, 3, and up to 7. The Green River Task Force has employed up to 50 full-time detectives and a multi-million-dollar computer system to crack the case. They have served at least 2 search warrants, but as of this morning, the killer remains unidentified. And Cindy Smith's disappearance was the last one in this area 3 years ago. John Sandifer for NBC News in Seattle.
Little past 6 minutes after 8 o'clock is the time.
On After 8 this morning, serial murderers, the people who kill again and again over a period of months or even years. According to an article in the current issue of Life magazine, 5,000 Americans were murdered by serial killers in 1983 alone. Their victims are strangers, their motives unknown. Ted Bundy, a former law student and young Republican, is on death row in Florida. He is suspected of killing more than 36 women. Henry Lee Lucas, a drifter, may have killed more than 360 people across the country, some of them with the help of a traveling companion, Otis Elwood Toole. Hillside strangler Kenneth Bianchi was convicted of killing 10 women. His cousin, Angelo Buono, was also involved. Christopher Wilder, millionaire builder and sportsman, was shot with his own gun after abducting at least 11 young women. 4 were murdered, 3 escaped, 4 are still missing. Others have avoided arrest. Since July 1982, 26 women, most of them prostitutes, have been found dead in Seattle, Washington, victims of a serial murderer who has been dubbed the Green River Killer. With us this morning from our affiliate KING in Seattle is Bob Keppel, the chief detective on that Ted Bundy case, now a consultant to the Green River Task Force. And in San Francisco at our affiliate KRON is Dr. Donald Lundy, a psychiatrist who has examined 12 serial killers. Good morning, gentlemen. Dr. Lundy, based on your examinations, is there a profile emerging that's common to these serial murderers?
There's a profile of these people, and that is that they are male, almost exclusively white males in their late 20s, between the age range of 25 to 35. They are highly intelligent with IQs in the 135, 140, and even above range. They are people who have had an obsession with sex and violence since the time they were children, and as 5-year-olds were known to be cutting off the heads and hands of their sisters' dolls, and at age 10 cutting up the family cat or dog, and then in adulthood actually acting out these fantasies they have that involve a combination of sex and aggression.
Well, why do they seem to go dormant there for a while between these bizarre childhood behaviors and the murderers themselves? They seem to live almost normal lives, superficially at least.
Well, there's both a period in maturation in terms of adolescence where, for who knows, developmental reasons, they aren't quite ready to go out and act out the fantasies that they've been having, although that period of development is a time of extremely active fantasy about such activities. Once they start killing, there are dormant periods in between the killings that may range from a few weeks to a few months. And what they're doing during that period of time is that they haven't lost interest in the subject, but rather they're reliving the past murder in great detail. Some go back to the murder site. Some have taken pictures, Polaroid pictures of the victim, and look at those and relive the experience, and that seems to keep them going for a matter of a couple of weeks, and then they start planning the next one, and that keeps them going for the next couple of weeks. These are the most carefully planned out, premeditated types of murder of all the kinds of murder that occur in this country.
Mr. Keppel, now that you know something about these serial murderers, does it help you find the next one, or does it just illustrate why it's so hard to find and stop these people?
One of the problems is that police departments don't recognize soon enough the serial. And we've been guilty for years of not communicating to each other well enough. And by virtue of the fact these are traveling killers, they're very mobile, and our transportation systems are very open and fast, they can get from one jurisdiction to another very quickly and pretty soon be out of sight by the time we find the body and have any following leads to take care of.
You know, I think you may have just answered my next question. Why does it seem to be an American phenomenon? Is it because of our interstate highway system?
Well, it's very much...
Yes, go ahead.
Very much connected to the automobile. I think certainly the increased frequency of these kinds of killings in the United States versus Europe and elsewhere has to do in part with the car. Most other murders that are committed in this country and elsewhere occur in homes or apartments or on the streets or in bars or places like that. But this kind of killing is unusual in that it's almost always related to transportation, to travel by automobile, and the victims are either picked up hitchhiking or they are women who are stranded on a highway in a stalled car. The moral of I guess that information is that one shouldn't hitchhike, or if your car is stalled, you should keep the doors locked and flash your lights until a police officer comes.
Mr. Keppel, your Green River killer doesn't quite match that profile, does he?
Well, he's picking on a different element of the population, and that appears to be, at this point, mostly prostitutes. And basically, it's all in the control that the serial killer can obtain over the victim, and prostitution makes it that much easier, as does hitchhiking.
Is there another explanation, Dr. Lundy, for why this Green River guy might be picking prostitutes?
Well, the motive in most of these killings is, in fact, sexual. There's a mixture of sexual and aggressive impulses in these people from an early age, as I said, and for various reasons, a number of them grow up being unable to experience any kind of sexual pleasure without some kind of violent activity associated with it. And they have a specific kind of victim in mind. It's not a senseless kind of killing or random series of victims like the recent massacre in San Ysidro, California. Rather, there is usually a woman of a certain age, and sometimes even a particular hair color and hairstyle, who represents somebody from this person's past. Often it's a mother, and in fact often the mothers have been prostitutes of these killers, and as children they saw their mothers in action. And
Dr. Lundy, we've got to leave it there. It's a disturbing profile, but I suppose the more we know, the better. Good luck, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
At 22 after the hour, it's time for a station break.
now almost disappeared from the illegal drug market. For a long time, people in the Seattle area and elsewhere in the Pacific Northwest have had a string of unsolved murders on their minds. They're called the Green River Murders. Well, now, 2 prisoners in a San Francisco jail have said they killed some of the victims, who were all women. But David Burrington reports that for now, Seattle police are skeptical.
For 2.5 years, the Seattle area has been terrorized by the Green River Killer, so named when the first bodies, 5 of them, were pulled from this river. Many of the 26 victims were young prostitutes from Seattle. Today, this man, 25-year-old Robert Mathias, said he killed some of them. So do you consider yourself to be the Green River Killer that everyone has been talking?
No, not the Green River.
But one of them?
Possibly.
Seattle police say they want to talk to Mathias. Until they do, they're withholding judgment. Earlier, in an interview taped by NBC Seattle affiliate KING-TV, Mathias described how he supposedly killed the women.
It was raped and beaten and they were strangled.
How many? How many girls?
5.
Those 5 were only in the Seattle area. A man who says he was Mathias's accomplice said they killed at least 6 women elsewhere. He said they posed as police officers, often near the Seattle airport.
Use the badge each time? Yeah, flash the shield and talk to him. You know, he would talk to him nice and look, you don't have nothing to worry about. You know, you're not going to be thrown in jail. We just want to ask you some questions and this and that. And the girls get in the car.
The apparent accomplice, Richard Carboni, said both he and Mathias had been sexually abused as children, and they hated prostitutes.
My solution wasn't to kill them. You know, I would just let them go their own way. You see, but Robert, he had this idea that he would help get rid of the trash. That was his statement.
The man who heads the police task force in Seattle says he's skeptical.
I do have some very strong doubts about the veracity of what these men are saying.
After talking with the 2 men, Seattle authorities will decide whether to ask for extradition. David Burrington, NBC News, San Francisco.
Fleischmann's. It does your heart good.
This is the story of a murder mystery. Not just one murder, not 2 or 3. This mystery concerns the violent death of some 80 women. They were killed one at a time. No one knows why, no one knows by whom. But there is reason to suspect that they were murdered by the same person. Some of them are known as the Green River Murders. But what about the rest? NBC's Bob Jameson has more.
The Southern California sun, which brings beauty and brightness to San Diego, is in stark contrast to the growing darkness along the city's El Cajon Boulevard. Someone is killing the women whose lives are spent on that street. Prostitutes, drug users. When 20-year-old Melissa Sandoval's body was discovered in May, dumped in a rural area, the string of unsolved murders of women in San Diego County reached 25.
In your 18 years with this department, have you seen anything like this?
Absolutely not, no.
The killings have fallen into a pattern. Many of the victims had ties to El Cajon Boulevard. Most were prostitutes. Most were strangled. The victims were nude or partially nude. The bodies were dumped in clusters in rural areas near highways. It is a pattern chillingly familiar to other police on the West Coast.
This is the Green River near Seattle, which gave its name to the worst string of unsolved serial murders in U.S. history. Female victims, most prostitutes, all believed killed by the same person.
The 5 bodies of women pulled from the Green River starting in 1982 were only the beginning. With growing disbelief, police in Seattle's King County eventually tied the murders of 41 women and the disappearance of 7 others to the same killer, a serial killer they have never caught.
The hardest thing to come to grips with for a lot of us is that this could have occurred here in our community for such a period of time. And as we sit here, that person responsible has yet to be brought to justice.
And may be responsible for a lot more murders.
Certainly if someone could kill 40 people, you could kill 60, and I just don't know where it ends.
What also haunts Evans and other investigators is that they don't know where it began. In the past 6 years, a string of murders, all strikingly similar, all unsolved, began in Vancouver in Canada and moved steadily south. Spokane, Seattle, Portland, And now San Diego, almost 80 women. For Tom Guillen and Carlton Smith, who have followed the case in Seattle since almost the first Green River killing, the West Coast murders are connected.
It's hard to imagine how two killers working independently can make them look the same. There's just too much there.
Police in both cities privately conclude that the serial killer who murdered in Seattle is responsible for the Portland slayings and at least some of the 25 killings in San Diego. And the victims themselves may be helping their murderer avoid capture.
Their lifestyle, their personalities, the people they associate with are into illegal activities or on the fringe of illegal activities. That has frustrated to some extent our attempt, if you will, to get information. If these victims were a middle-class housewife, the suburban neighbor, if you will, it would be a wholly different type of case.
What's it going to take to solve this crime? One lucky break. One individual out there that knows in their heart who's done this and has been reluctant to come forward. This suspect, this individual, has had a remarkable string of luck, and sooner or later, it's going to run out.
And Evans hopes that the killer's luck, like that of the women he's murdered recently, runs out on El Cajon Boulevard before he starts killing somewhere else. Bob Jameson, NBC News, San Diego.
A brush fire broke out this afternoon.
Irving R. Levine, NBC News, Washington.
In the early 80s, police in Washington state tied the deaths of 49 young women to the so-called Green River Killer. The killer apparently left the region in 1984, but the number of murders is on the rise again, and police fear the killer may be back. Brendan McLaughlin reports.
Body parts turn up at random, usually discovered by hikers or fishermen. The police are called in, and together with volunteers and trained dogs, they look for the rest of the body. It's always a search without a rescue. The Seattle Times newspaper details 40 unsolved murders in 3 western Washington counties, all of the bodies discovered in the last 8 years. The victims are typically young women, many of them runaways and prostitutes. The sheer number of murders raises suspicion that a serial killer is at work, but police are skeptical.
Because we're not seeing the common threads other than the background of some of these women and the general area that their bodies have been deposited in.
These more recent victims fit the profile of 49 women murdered by the Green River Killer. That case remains open, but the killer was thought to have left the area in 1984. As in that investigation, police have little more than bones for evidence. It sometimes takes years just to identify the body, and missing persons reports come in late or not at all.
We had a woman who was reported missing 2 years after she was last seen. So that type of time delay can really hamper investigators.
Serial killer or not, the Puget Sound region has a murder problem. And because so many of these bodies were discovered accidentally, some believe there are many more victims in these woods yet to be discovered. Brendan McLaughlin for NBC News, Seattle.
In the early 1980s, the area around the Green River south of Seattle was the site of one of the most gruesome serial killing sprees this country has ever seen. At least 49 women, police say, mostly prostitutes and runaways, disappeared or were found murdered along this stretch of water. Gary Leon Ridgway, now in custody, was a prime suspect back then, but police didn't have enough evidence to make a solid case. But in 1987, Ridgway was asked to chew on a piece of gauze, leaving his saliva and, more importantly, a DNA sample with police, who held on to it. Even though DNA technology hadn't reached maturity yet, police believed it was only a matter of time. Now, new technology, police say, has linked Ridgway's DNA with DNA found on 3 of the Green River victims, while other evidence, police say, ties him to a 4th. A team of scientists spent more than 800 hours on the lab work.
All these women are associated to someone somehow. Hopefully it'll help to bring some closure.
But Ridgway's attorney says DNA evidence is not airtight.
It's just a tool. It's not the voice of God.
Prosecutors are also sifting through some 10,000 pieces of evidence stored in a freezer and in boxes for nearly 20 years.
We have boxes of dirt. We have car parts. We have
name it, we probably have it.
They estimate it could take months, even years, to analyze it all. Police have also searched homes where Ridgway has lived over the years, seizing everything from wigs to a book about the killings. As Seattle investigators try to build their case, as many as 80 unsolved murders of women from San Diego to Canada are now also being re-examined. Virginia Cha, NBC News.
For the family of Angela Marie Girdner, it's been a long 26 years. She disappeared in 1983. 2 years later, somebody discovered her remains near the Tualatin Country Club. And tonight, through dental records, they've been identified as the missing teenagers. A bittersweet moment for Girdner's family.
You obviously hope that your loved one's alive somewhere, even though it's not logical. But at the same time, they can stop wondering.
But who would kill a then 16-year-old girl? Perhaps the same person who murdered Shirley Sherrill, Denise Bush, and Tammy Lyles. All three bodies were found within a mile of Girdner's, all in 1985.
Those two and Tammy were all missing persons out of Seattle and all known prostitutes.
And in 2001, Green River killer Gary Ridgway confessed to killing 48 women, 2 of whom were Sherrill and Bush. But he says he did not murder Lyles or Girdner.
These guys are hunters. They hunt people, like some people hunt elk.
Psychologist Frank Calistro has no connection to the case, but he believes he knows why Ridgway is refusing to take responsibility.
It's one more opportunity to stick it to law enforcement. It's an opportunity to stretch out your new 20 minutes of fame.
And even though they don't have a confession, detectives say Ridgway is their #1 suspect. But if and when charges will come down is anybody's guess.
Will there be justice for Angela Girdner? Well, I guess it all depends on your perspective. If you think justice is Gary Ridgway sitting in prison for the rest of his life, then yes, because that's what's going to happen with him. If you want to pin this murder on him, it's hard to say. It depends on what evidence we get in the future.
It says here, I killed the 48 women listed in the state's second amended information. In most cases, when I murdered these women, I did not know their names. Most of the time, I killed them the first time I met them, and I do not have a good memory for their faces. I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
The statement continues, I have reviewed information and discovery about each of the murders with my attorneys, and I am positive that I killed each one of the women charged in the second amended information. I killed them all in King County. I killed most of them in my house near Military Road, and I killed a lot of them in my truck, not far from where I picked them up. I killed some of them outside. I remember leaving each woman's body in the place where she was found. Is that true?
Yes.
Your statement continues, I have discussed with my attorneys the common scheme or plan aggravating circumstance charged in all these murders. I agree that each of the murders I committed was part of a common scheme or plan. The plan was, I wanted to kill as many women I thought were prostitutes as I possibly could. Is that true?
Yes.
Your statement continues, I picked prostitutes as my victims because I hate most prostitutes, and I did not want to pay them for sex. I also picked prostitutes as victims because they were easy to pick up without being noticed. I knew they would not be reported missing right away and might never be reported missing. I picked prostitutes because I thought I could kill as many of them as I wanted without getting caught. Is that true?
Yes.
Your statement continues, another part of my plan was where I put the bodies of these women. Most of the time, I took the women's jewelry and their clothes to get rid of any evidence and make them harder to identify. I placed most of the bodies in groups which I call clusters. I did this because I wanted to keep track of all the women I killed. I liked to drive by the clusters around the county and think about the women I placed there. I usually used a landmark to remember a cluster and the women I placed there. Sometimes I killed and dumped a woman intending to start a new cluster and never returned because I thought I might get caught putting more women there. Is that true?
Yes.
Then your statement reads, my statement as to each counts are as follows. I'd like to ask you about what you say.
Rights groups are already challenging the ban in court. A man is expected to plead guilty to 48 counts of murder today. The 54-year-old Gary Ridgway was arrested 2 years ago for the so-called Green River killings in Oregon and Washington states. He has been providing details of some of the killings in a bid to avoid the death penalty. It has long been known that highways and deer can be a deadly combination. Well, now new figures in attacks on military and civilian targets. One man ended a 20-year mystery Wednesday over who killed 48 women in the so-called Green River killing spree of the 1980s. In a deal to avoid the death penalty, Gary Ridgway pleaded guilty to killing all 48 women, most of them found in the Seattle area. Many victims, relatives of the victims, who included teenage runaways, were in the courtroom when he confessed. Rosie O'Donnell returns to the courtroom today in the breach of contract trial for guys with Confederate flags in their pickup trucks. Some family members of victims of the Green River killer are unhappy with the plea bargain that keeps him off of death row. For almost 8 minutes in Seattle on Wednesday, Gary Ridgway answered guilty to the names of 48 murdered women as the names were being read aloud. He faces life in prison. And Thomas Jefferson's face will stay on the front of the nickel as the 5-cent piece.
John, as always, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Sure. It's 11 after the hour. Here's Katie.
Matt, thank you. More now on Gary Leon Ridgway, the man who admitted Wednesday to being the worst serial killer in U.S. history. Some families, though, are wondering why he's not getting the death penalty. NBC's James Satori is outside the courtroom in Seattle this morning. James, good morning.
Good morning, Katie. Gary Ridgway's plea bargain seals his fate. He will escape the death penalty, but spend the rest of his life behind bars. No possibility of parole. It's a deal, though, that some family members of his victims are still grappling with.
Frankly, I think that death is too good for Gary Ridgway.
I support the decision that was made. My mom was one of the first 4 victims that they charged Gary Ridgway with.
Without the plea bargain, we would be the same place we were last week.
In court, 54-year-old Gary Ridgway pled guilty to 48 murders spanning more than 20 years. In a statement read by the prosecutor, he admitted targeting Seattle area prostitutes.
I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
Ridgway told investigators, quote, "Choking is what I did, and I was pretty good at it." He admitted killing the women at his house, in his truck, or outside, then dumping the bodies in clusters. In all, Ridgway claimed he killed over 60 women in King County, but he also acknowledged that he was a pathological liar. Police arrested Ridgway 2 years ago on a handful of murder charges, but last June he struck the plea bargain, confessing to 48 murders, leading investigators to new human remains, and giving information about other victims. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to spare him from the death penalty. The prosecutor says he agonized over the deal, but says in this case, resolving unsolved murders took precedence.
Disagreement was the avenue to the truth. And in the end, the search for truth is why we have a criminal justice system.
And finding all the truth is not over yet. Ridgway may yet face more charges as prosecutors and investigators look at other unsolved murders. Katie?
All right, James Satori in Seattle. James, thank you. It's 7:14. Once again, here's Matt.
Katie, thank you. The captain of that ferry
defend the measure against those who try to overturn it. A serial killer in Seattle has pleaded guilty on Wednesday to more murders than any other serial killer in U.S. history. Gary Ridgway admitted to killing 48 women since the early 1980s. As part of the plea deal, the so-called Green River Killer will get life in prison. Rosie O'Donnell will be back in court today in her multi-million-dollar battle with the former public. And if they work out, 2 overnight visits. Today in Seattle, confessed Green River serial killer Gary Ridgway will be formally sentenced to life in prison without parole. Last month, he pleaded guilty to 48 murders, more than any other serial killer in U.S. history. Police want an 86-year-old man to be charged with manslaughter.
Dateline tonight, NBC 8/7 Central.
We're back with NBC News in depth tonight. A killer in Colorado is behind bars where authorities say he is spilling secrets he's been keeping for years. Robert Brown now says he's responsible for dozens of murders, mostly young women going all the way back to the 1970s. And as NBC's Mike Taibbi reports, investigators in Colorado say they believe him.
A common killer with a common name, 53-year-old Robert Brown, says he really belongs in the ranks of this country's most uncommonly brutal serial killers. At least 49 victims, mostly young women and teenagers, in at least 9 states. His methods, stabbings and strangulations, 7 of his claimed murders corroborated by his own descriptions.
The killer would be the only one that would have the information in that level of detail.
Brown was already serving a life sentence for a 1991 murder when retired cold case detective Charlie Hess started exchanging letters with him that led to Brown's admissions about his murderous past.
Does he have a conscience, or is that what motivated him? I have no idea.
He took everything from me.
But Joseph Sperry has an indelible idea of what Robert Brown did, cut his young wife Rocio to pieces 19 years ago, a murder to which Brown pleaded guilty Thursday.
He's a piece of scum. He don't belong here. You know, he don't belong with society. It's just, he ruined the family. He ruined a beautiful family.
Is Brown telling the truth about the rest of his 20-year murder spree? Impossible to know yet, but experts wonder about the motive for his admissions. If true, he'd be on the list with America's most notorious serial killers. John Wayne Gacy, Wayne Williams, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and the Green River Killer Gary Ridgway with 48 claimed victims. Brown's claim, again, is 49.
49 murders that Brown admits to puts him the record holder as far as serial killers by 1 murder. That's an interesting number, and I think that's yet to be proven by the authorities.
But for the families of at least 7 victims, their names from a case file and their photos can finally be part of completed stories, tragic and enraging as they must be. Mike Taibbi, NBC News.
Up next here, we look at a business trend that is really taking off. It's a new way to...
And we had to go over a log. And it was slippery, and I kind of fell and came face to face with the human skull.
The discovery of a skull was a shock.
Yeah, I kind of did scream.
But today's announcement that it belonged to yet another victim of the Green River Killer, not so much.
That's what we figured when we were heading home.
Things have changed in the 3 decades since Gary Ridgway was hiding his victims in this Auburn area, but there are still some rural pockets where residents are all too familiar with the Green River killings.
They found a body on the ravine years ago.
The first thing I thought of was it's probably another Green River body.
The owner of the property where this latest victim was found said it came as no surprise to him that this was Ridgway related. And he can easily see how a body could be down in the deep ravine for years without being discovered.
I don't know if you've been down in there, but that is really steep. It's just a wasted acre.
It may not be the most shocking discovery for most residents, but for 3 kids looking for adventure in the neighborhood ravine, well, let's just say they found it.
Well, I thought it was kind of surreal.
Kids discovered a skull while playing in this Auburn ravine on Tuesday. Using dental records, King County Sheriff's investigators identified the remains of a woman who hasn't been seen for nearly 30 years, Rebecca Marrero.
She was 20 years old when she disappeared in 1982, December of 1982. We've long thought that she was most likely a victim of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer.
But detectives couldn't make the case against Gary Ridgway, in part because they didn't have Marrero's remains, until now. Marrero's bones were found close to those of Marie Malvar, discovered when Ridgway confessed to her murder in 2003.
One of Gary Ridgway's trademarks was he would leave bodies, multiple bodies in one particular spot, at least one general area, 2, 3, sometimes even 4. In 2003, we found a second body not too far from where this one was found, Marie Malvar. In fact, he was tried and convicted in her homicide.
Marrero disappeared along this stretch of Pacific Highway in SeaTac. Investigators discussed her case with Ridgway years ago, but it wasn't included in the plea agreement that allowed Ridgway to avoid the death penalty by confessing to 48 killings. Prosecutors must decide if Ridgway can be tried if he's linked to this most recent murder.
They're certainly going to be looking at that agreement and looking at our case and seeing if he can be charged with this one, but there are certainly no guarantees.
Late today, Ridgway's former lawyer was asked if his one-time client could be charged or even face the death penalty.
I really don't think so. I mean, I believe she was the subject of the interviews, and he was made as many disclosures as he could regarding her case. So I like to think it's not something new that's going to reopen those possibilities.